to the 4, where we answer 4 questions of consequence. Well, 1 of consequence and 3 that we hope are helpful to you. Well, who I have with me today is Devin O'Donnell, Ty Rallens, and David Goodwin, and they make up the executive team of ACCS, and I'm Heather Lloyd with Concordis Education Partners. We're excited to bring this podcast to you, and we're going to start with one question and just get rolling. The first question is, worksheets in classical Christian education, are they good or bad? Devin, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Bad.
Okay.
But it does depend on how you use them. So, David, you and I have talked about this before.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about worksheets is they serve a purpose. The problem is people use them as the Swiss Army knife of the grammar schools. Right. So what we want to do is narrow the purpose, for example, to speed drills. Speed drills in mathematics.
Right.
You want your kids to be able to do their math facts without counting on their fingers, and worksheets are good for that.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is that when teachers fall into the temptation of classroom management by way of worksheet, right? So you're done with that worksheet. I can't have any unused time. Everything has to be utilitarian, and therefore here's another worksheet for you to do. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes a bit of a grind. And I mean, Heather, you generally lean against this?
I do, especially if I walk into the classroom and I see a teacher at the front of the room and the kids with worksheets, okay, and the teacher's just kind of walking around or using the worksheets to teach from. I think that just takes away from the engagement that classical Christian education should have. One of the things I would say, Ty, you're the only one of us here that actually experienced classical Christian education. So what was, did you?
I didn't have any classical education in the grammar school stage.
Okay.
I started when I was 14 years old, and so there were a lot more rhetorical exercises, things like this. I can remember in college doing something that we called a theology worksheet, right? Doing some Bible exegesis, unpicking the different meaning in the passages. Right. And the meaning in that context was to kind of step away from a right or wrong answer and input a idea of there's something to try out here. There's something to kind of practice through. Mm-hmm. That feels like the good kind of worksheet. Mm-hmm. And it seems like I did it, I got 100, it's over now, I can put it behind me. That's the bad kind, right?
Well, and I think that's a big thing of we can get so everybody's wanting prescription. And so it's easy to say they're bad or they're good. And the thing is, it's about the intentionality of how they're used. They can be used well, but they're rarely used well would be maybe the way I would say.
They're most often used poorly because they're used too much. And that's, I think, the reason they get such a bad rap in classical Christian circles. That and the fact that really there can also be bad purposes. If you center what you're doing on information, and that's the essence of the class during a day is how much did we achieve? Well, we learned, quote unquote, these 36 things. And you've got a worksheet for every one of those to prove it. Mm-hmm. That's the obviously hyperbolic and extreme case of you're using worksheets to drive an information-based curriculum, which is antithetical to the classical model.
It's getting through the education and kind of checking the box. Yep, they learned that because they did a worksheet, which is not the case. It's just not.
And it's not necessarily an assessment. You don't know that mastery's been achieved here. Right. I heard of a family that did weeks and weeks of vacation through the year, but there was no grade or outcome variation because the worksheets were all turned in. And what does that say about the educational experience in the room, Heather?
It's really bad. In fact, I have a similar story. I had a family that had missed a bunch of quite a few classes, and then they were doing fine. And that said to me,
right. There you
you're not doing classical education that the student can miss that many classes and do all right because the student was receiving packets to complete at home, and that's not what education is.
What is it? Instead of worksheets, if they're overused, what happens in the classroom that you can't miss for weeks of vacation?
Ooh, I would say it's the soft grading and the coaching. I would say it's the teacher, it's the whiteboards flipping up and the teacher going around going, let me compare Devin's answer to David's answer. And it's that coaching. It's kind of like on the football field, if a teammate misses one practice after another, eventually they're not going to be good at playing the game unless the coach is doing nothing for them.
Yeah. There's those. I mean, if to use that analogy, the sports player comes to the coach, what do I need to make up? He can give him all the lines to do,
Right.
or the drills,
Right.
but there's a formational aspect and a esprit de corps
Right.
as part of the ethos. So you're with a cohort, and that's shaping you as well. So
That's good.
yeah,
Well, and I think that's as the audience sits here and thinks through what is classical. It's not that if you're walking into your classroom and you see a worksheet, it's automatically this wrong thing.
Yeah.
But it is an aspect of, like, as teachers, you should be going, what are we intentionally doing?
Right.
I'm going to move on to question 2, just so we get through all of our questions. Question 2 is family interviews. What is the most important element? And this is going to be a classical, like, distill it down to one thing that is the most important thing in a family interview to make sure that they are mission fit. I'm going to lay that out there because I think we need to already assume we're trying to find mission fit. What's the one question that we ask?
Let me guess first, since I've never done a family interview before. Okay. And I can imagine, based on some of the families I've had in the class, it would be, does the family really want a different kind of education? Because what that desire is going to motivate the participation in the classroom, whether the teacher is backed up at home with the student, all the disciplinary elements of it. So there needs to be a hunger for something different. That's my offer.
I love that you said that. I think after COVID, things changed, that everybody wanted something different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a good start. But what else would you say the family needs to want?
Well, of course, when it comes to the Paideia project, we as schoolroom educators are really the tail on the dog. The main work of Paideia happens in the home. So you have to be able to assess, is this family a family that can be a support to the mission of the school? And not because they work for us, but because we work for them. And if we're trying to take material that they're doing at home and it's not working at home, it's not going to work at the school. And we've all seen that situation. So questions on your survey that solicit things like how, what's the stability of the home like?
what's the family culture like?
We have things that, do you guys read books?
Right.
Is this first marriage? Is this a blended family? I mean,
How often do you go to church?
yeah, how often do you go to church is a big one. Basically, you're trying to assess how supportive is this family going to be in forming a Christian Paideia.
One of the things that's hard in today's culture is asking these very invasive questions. What's your home life like? But one of the things I've used in family interviews to tell families is if home and school are not aligned, your children are going to have to choose which authority they trust. You're going to make them, if home looks different than the school, that child's going to sit there and go, I have to trust one over the other. And we don't want to put you as parents in a compromising position. That's why this conversation matters. And that's kind of the way I like to address it, just to get them on board. I don't know, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah. I always found myself in this sort of tension because I loved talking about the classical piece with parents when they would come in.
Yes.
But I found it more important to ask those more cultural questions, and even some of the policies to make sure, like, you do understand what you're getting into.
Right.
Going through even some of the parts of the handbook. This is how we understand discipline, for instance. This is
That's a good
process.
That's a good one.
One pro tip I would throw in here that I learned the hard way is don't have their children in the room when you're asking these questions. It's rather difficult to ask good questions about the home when the kids are in the room.
Right.
They may find out things they didn't
know.
really know.
That's true. You want the parents to be able to speak freely. And
Yes.
I think there is a warmth to the environment to make sure that we're not here to judge you.
Yes.
We're here to make sure that we can serve you well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's, I think, that attitude. I have worked with a couple of heads of school that make it almost an antagonistic meeting. And that's not really what it should be. It should be more like a good interview of, like, are we aligned together?
Yeah.
Is, I think, a good way.
That's a
And how do you encourage that in yourself or in the interview, the truthful answers to the questions that seem like they have high stakes, right? They really want to get into the school. There's probably a wait list. And then you're asking questions like, is this your first marriage? Well, that's a yes or no question.
Right.
I might feel like as a parent, I've failed the interview on the first question, and now we're going to go through this whole other thing. So what's the tone?
I think there's also a strategy to how you start with what questions you start with.
Yes.
You go with easier questions. Don't start with that one. And I think you also give your reason for asking.
Yeah.
I think it's important to...
Usually the way I would ask that particular one is, are all the children your biological children? Because that's usually what you're most interested in knowing in the circumstance. So you definitely have to be delicate with it. I think when we did it, we really had just 3 categories that we were trying to get the answer in. Did the parent love the Lord? Do the parents love the Lord? Were they able to provide support because of the structure of the family? So it was kind of the other question about, biological children and that sort of thing. And then the third one was, do they understand classical education at any level?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those 3 things pretty much put it together.
I think the classical is where you want to go beyond, back to what you said, Ty. You want to go beyond just they want something else. We want them to want classical because as our culture has really degraded, classical Christian education truly is countercultural, in and of itself. And so they have to not just not want something, they have to really want it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to move on to the next question, a little lighter hearted, possibly, although it can cause a lot of tension. Football teams in the classical Christian school, yes or no? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
All tied.
Yeah,
Let's go.
that's right. What do we do with
that's
and I say football, not basketball. Football comes with a subculture that is bigger than any other sport. Now there's probably some basketball players out there not happy about that, but it just does. It's a bigger stadium, everything. So football teams, yes or no, Devin?
Well, I know of some good friends of mine who are headmasters who are kind of doctrinaire on this position and against football teams because there is a culture associated with the professional football and college football that maybe goes against the kind of culture that you're trying to build at your classical Christian school. At the same time, there is a sense, Ty, we were talking about this with regard to tradition.
Yes.
Like I grew up on the West Coast. Football is not that interesting to me, sorry. But I know if I'm in Georgia or in Alabama or in some of the Southeast, football is
a big deal.
Serious business.
Yeah.
And I think this is really almost a gospel issue or what is the classical tradition, because we believe that the gospel, this whole tradition that we're trying to pass on to our children, took root in specific soil. It came through certain works, certain peoples, certain ideas, and that conversation is something we're joining in with. Well, at a certain point, that starts to branch out. And the way it looks in Idaho, where I grew up, is different than Georgia, where somebody else grew up. How are you going to say that you believe in tradition if you're offering a cookie cutter approach to classical education across an entire nation of people with some important varying?
So there might be a school that needs to do it and it's right to do it, and another school that it's wrong to do it.
I think so.
Okay.
And I also could imagine in a big enough market that there's options to do both. So there may be families who choose to do it and families who don't.
I think, David, you can speak to this. I think you should also consider the fact that it is a significant financial investment as well.
And time investment.
Yeah.
It is a count the cost
Exactly.
thing. Yeah.
Most of the headmasters I've talked to don't really worry too much about the money because it comes.
Because it's going to bring
people will give it.
If you build
If you build it, they do come.
It really comes down to what is the play. Everything you do at a school needs to fit inside the parameters of your mission on what you're trying. What is the goal? And we're all Paideia folks. So what are we trying to formulate here? I think there's a couple of interesting benchmark points that we could look to. One being your alma mater. They care a lot about rowing, not about anything else, as I understand it.
Yes, rowing is the most popular sport at the University of Oxford.
But outside of that, sports are kind of just fun activities, as I understand.
It's an amazing difference. That's true. Maybe it's because it's such an academically selective university, but people show up and if they like a sport, they play the sport, but that's after academic time. And there really is not much of a following or an excitement in it. that's probably only true at 2 universities in the whole UK, and I think none of the Ivy Leagues in the United States, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So most of the other UK universities do have sports as a central thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's new. I didn't know that. But then you look at the other possible bookend example would be the Greeks. Gymnasium was a big part of classical education in the Greco-Roman world, and it was often martial arts based. So when I say martial arts, we all have an image in our mind of sort of
Karate.
yeah, exactly. But then more along the lines of fighting wars kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a place for sports in the mission of the school, but the conversation has to be had about how big that space is and where its objectives lie in order to rightfully size football into it. And football is tough because it will develop a life of its own.
It draws in a different kind of audience and a different mentality. And I think you have to have a head of school and a board that is very much prepared for what that's going to bring. And I think they have to count that cost.
I will say that of the classical Christian schools I visited, those with football programs, I've seen them done well and seen them done poorly. And when they're done poorly, football looks very similar to what it looks like at every other high school you would go to, which I think might come. Is this week?
We got another question coming up on that. Yeah.
But I have also seen it done very well where they have weight rooms and that kind of thing, and the young men look like men. It really
We are forming strong young men.
yes, and that's important.
Yeah,
we shouldn't discount the fact that athleticism is a part of education, and it's important that young men have it.
Yes.
I think that
In particular,
Universally acknowledged that every young man does want to run at something and hit it
right.
hard.
It's an
Body.
well, and I mean, a lot of people don't know the history of football, but it was started because they felt like American men were getting wimpy. And so they wanted to kind of bolster the strength of that. But one of the things that is interesting is if you walk on campus and the football players are walking around like they're gods, you know you've got an unhealthy balance. And if anybody that's seen that, you can tell. And if they're walking differently to their classes because they are the football team, I think you got to bring the humility back somehow because that's.
I think that can be true. I think that's just be careful not to misjudge what they are. I mean, some of what I appreciate about colleges or about high schools that do have football programs is those young men walk around with purpose, and that
Purpose is
sometimes
different.
looks like it might be different than what the gangly kids bouncing off the lockers and that kind of thing versus the guys who just come in, get the job done, get their books switched out, shut the door, and get into work. That kind of what I've noticed is that level of maturity among schools that have strong athletic programs is actually helpful. What I look for is going then into the classroom and seeing if those same kids are participating in the great
Are they leaders in
conversations.
other areas?
Are they leading in the academics?
Are they
Yeah.
passive?
If they're not and someone else is,
Right.
then you got a problem because you got wobble.
Well, you have the typical. That's like the archetype, right? The scholar, the jock that is like totally passive in the classroom, totally active on the field, right? Somehow that we don't want that.
Right.
No.
It's a balance of two different kinds of things we need, right? We need participation, that we're extending something about education to everyone who comes in the doors. There's a standard. Not everyone is reaching that highest level of the standard, but they're all encouraged. On the other hand, competitive sport, and we're talking about young men, I think this applies for many young women as well. The objectivity of competition brings a reality that you don't get if everyone is participating, if we're just learning the rules of something.
Right. There's a resilience that comes from competition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Losing is just as important as winning.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think the cultivation of virtue being one of the central purposes of what we do
Yes.
is better played out a lot of times for the junior high boy on the sports field than it is in
certainly can.
theory
Yeah.
in the
You have a
classroom.
good coach. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good coach makes a big
sacrifice. It's the classic. It is the basketball player. Does he pass the ball or shoot it? those kinds of virtues are developed uniquely in sports, which I think why the martial arts were so dominant in the Greek form of classical education, is they were trying to teach those virtues. So I
The
think
team aspect's huge
I think
too.
there's room for a future question about sports in general, but football itself.
It's good. Well, real quickly, who all played sports? Did you play sports?
yeah.
Did you play sports? Play sports, and I did too. So yes, I think it is an important part of that. Well, we're on to our final and fourth question, and this is our battle question. So this is a question that we are going to go ahead and like kind of pull off the gloves. Let's really discuss this, and I think it's because it's really important for the audience to hear what are the varying opinions on this. So we're going to kind of have at it. The question is, what is the difference between joyful rigor and rigor mortis in the classical Christian classroom? And I think that that's a huge way to put it. Like the rigor mortis, like you can see the difference. It's palpable when there is dead education in the classical tradition versus joyful, joyful beauty in the tradition.
We're all going to agree on this because, he wrote a book on it. So,
What was your book, Devin? What was your book?
I did write a book for the Classical Academic Press, The Age of Martha, which is a call for contemplative learning in a frenzied age.
Would you flesh that out? Contemplative learning, contemplative learning.
So, I mean, Christopher Barron has talked about this at great length, but, really recovering the meaning of school. And the meaning of school is its root in skole, which is the Greek word for leisure, right? Very different from what we think of when we hear that word now. We have all kinds of different associations when we think of leisure. It's not the cessation of activity. It's a different kind of activity, and it's a different kind of even mental activity. So we're really, I do think that there's great value in recovering that vision, but I think David's probably poking me a little bit here. I think the temptation is when we hear leisure, when we hear joyful learning, we think that we're lowering
the standard.
Right. So,
yeah. How are we not?
in some ways, we may actually take some things away. And
first of all, define standard. I think that would be a good thing. What do we mean by standard? Because if we're wanting a rigorous standard, what does that mean?
Yeah. You guys are all looking at me.
Yeah. Come on, give us the answer, Devin.
Well, I think if our standard is utilitarian, right, means to an end. Grades, for instance, if the grade becomes the most valuable acquisition, then we've missed the mark, right?
Gotcha.
I think the standard. So if you looked at what C.S. Lewis had to say about it, Lewis, when he was asked what would be the first thing you would do to reform the education program in his day, he said, "We teach too many subjects."
Yeah.
We have to simplify some of this. I think if the standard, for instance, back to your question, is we have to read every book we possibly can. I'm just going to say
the canon of classical.
Yeah. And the omnibus was a good attempt at trying to create a kind of integrated humanities program. But if our standard is we need to read everything, then I think we get a very shallower, understanding of the texts, and not as deep.
Two more kind of wrong ways of defining rigor. You're talking about coverage, like if we've covered everything, that's rigorous. I think people without much reflection kind of expect rigor means either really high test scores or evidence that a lot of work is happening.
I think a lot of work is the common.
Yes.
We have to remember a couple of things. One is which test, because recently, and David's written about this, the tests have been changing. And so a test score means something different than it did before. And who's controlling that? If your goal is just the test score, you're missing something. A lot of work happening in the classroom. Well, what is the end result?
Right.
Are your students loving what their experience is? I had a student in the university where I work, Templeton Honors College, say she's considering transferring there because she had a classical education. She loved it so much. The place that she's at is a much more progressive model, and there's no teaching or learning or cultivation of her spirit going on, and she misses it. She's 2 years into a nursing degree, and she's trying to figure out what she's going to do to get back what she had before. That's success, not
It is. that
right
love,
hair
that
pulled out
love
of
of
the
learning.
head, right?
But I do think the argument is, and I think it's harder, I think it was easier 20 years ago. We have a different group of parents. And for parents that are watching, I mean, it's a different group of parents. And the view of rigor is so varied. You've got one family that is going to say rigor is, gosh, an hour of homework a night on top of the 3 sports that they do and the ballet lessons and the piano lessons is just too much.
Right.
And I think it's more about back to that contemplation, time for contemplation, which means we have to go mile deep, inch wide, not mile wide, inch deep. And I would say rigor is the depth of the education, not the amount of the education, would be the way I would say rigor needs to be.
Well, you bring up homework, and that's always going to be a very difficult challenge for schools to get right. I mean, so you see in the handbook, some schools will have, they have allocated a certain number of minutes that they estimate homework is going to be for
Each class.
For each class, right?
Yeah.
Which is totally impossible because all the students are different and all home, situations are different. And
Right.
so I think, but I do think at the same time, all of those qualifiers aside, I think some schools do give too much homework.
Way too much. Well, especially if it gets back to the worksheets question.
Yes.
Especially if they are going home with a stack and it's like, let me get through this education. There's no time to contemplate if I'm just trying to get it done.
Yeah.
There's also a goal that can be cultivated within the student. And I think this is subtle. It goes by class. I taught a very academically oriented cohort one year. And a problem that emerged is these students spent all their time on chemistry homework and they felt overwhelmed and unable to get to their humanities reading and writing, which is arguably a pretty important part of the classical education. It's kind of like, why is this happening? It's like, well, they felt that they were able to assess whether they had achieved mastery or not yet in this sort of worksheet-oriented, quantitative thinking subject, and they would keep working at it until they felt they were there. It was much harder for them to know what was enough or what was excellence
Right.
in a humanities kind of discipline. And so even that suggested to me that the students themselves have an idea of academic achievement that needs to be cultivated.
That's very true. David, I want to ask you a question that might load the field here a little bit more, but the question is, which subject should be the most rigorous in the classical Christian education? Which subject should be the most rigorous?
Yeah, I mean, as I listen to the conversation, I think that a lot of this is kind of like, academics in some ways isn't too different than sports. A lot of it is like working out, training for a race of some sort. There are those people who just put in 1,000 miles, right? They just put in a lot of effort. These days, those people don't win because you have to be smart in how you prepare for any athletic exercise. You've got steps that you go through, and there's trainers who can teach you how to do this. I think rigor is the equivalent of effort versus the way the rigor is used. No one ever wins a marathon without rigor, but they don't win the marathon with just rigor. It has to be put into the right vehicle. So as far as subjects with rigor, obviously science and math, because they're generally objective in their way of assessment, often become the biggest time consumers. And really the most important stuff we do is in the humanities. And I say that knowing now that I'm going to have hate mail. But I was a chemistry major.
We said it would be controversial.
Yeah, this is the battle question.
Mainly, I say that because quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning, to the things I've written on testing, are the two thought skills or thought cultivations that we're trying to really build in these students. And those come primarily through the liberal arts. They aren't coming through, science and math on quantitative reasoning to some extent, but there's a reason why the old SAT only required up to Algebra 2, because it was not supposed to test knowledge of math. It was testing your reasoning capacity.
Right.
So
Aptitude.
So that's where I think we need to spend more time assessing and working in the humanities than in the sciences. But I think the thing about rigor is if we go back to what our purpose is as an educational entity, in a classical Christian sense, it's the cultivation of virtue. When you habituate students to virtue, or habituation leads to virtue, and rigor is a virtue. Being able to work hard and efficiently is not natural. It's cultivated, and it's cultivated through practice and habit. And so that, I think, is the antithesis or the other side of the coin when it comes to what we do with rigor. I think too much these days, you mentioned sort of the leisure and schola. Those are all true, but basically what that meant was they weren't out in the field digging ditches because they owned the farm. And so they could spend their time in their
Contemplating.
rigor working on education instead of crops. And that was schola. That was, well, I have leisure because I own the field. I don't have to farm it.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings up so many of our kids think of what they're doing in school as arduous. I think the fact that you brought up that the kids are the ones providing it's their work ethic that is the rigor is an interesting way to think about it. And good back to the family interviews to ask, do you agree with as parents? Because if you think about it in those terms, we've almost got kids that are, and I think we have to be careful of this in classical Christian education, where the kids feel like they have it really hard because they're doing classical Christian education where they're having to do a lot of reading. How many of us would love to just have 2 or 3 hours in the evening to read because we had to?
Yeah.
There is a beauty to that.
That's right.
That I don't think we've cultivated gratitude in our kids. We've almost said, you've got this rigorous, hard education. No. You've got time to invest. Your families are giving you time to invest. You're not having to do the physical labor that many other people are. And you have this beautiful time to read, and you'll never have this time again. And it only benefits you.
And it's contemplation, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
Because I also want to save David from his hate mail about the quadrivium, right? And the old way of talking about these things is these are via ways of knowing. And there are 7 liberal arts because there are language-based ways of knowing, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And there are mathematical, quantitative ways of knowing the world. The point is to know the world, to understand it, to contemplate it, and be transformed by it. We associate rigor with math and science because we've gotten away from that reasoning with these ways of thinking more towards some kind of rote mastery or math facts or speed of calculation. And I think that there's loads of opportunities. We should be coming back to that question, right? How can we do science better in classrooms? Because it's not classical. If we could do more trying to understand the world through motion, through music, through harmony, that would be fine.
Yeah.
We could spend equal time on language arts and quantitative arts if we knew how to do that.
I think that's huge. That's a big difference.
Let's move to the practical really quick. I think a big piece of how to deal with the rigor problem in classical Christian schools is change the nature of homework assignments. Because the problem is when we start saying read pages 30 through 42 tonight, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, you've just assigned something for which there's very little desire to know. All you've done is told me I'm supposed to do something.
I'm supposed to get through this material.
Right. Yeah. If you say, as a teacher, I want you to find out tonight the answer to this question.
Yes.
And here's some ways you can do this, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow, but I want you to keep a log of what you researched for me so that I can see what you looked at. Now you've put them on a learning task. Not they
have a mission, not something to just get through.
It's wonder.
Yeah, it's wonder. It is wonder.
Asking them to use their wonder.
So what if we said rigor and wonder have to go together, or else there's not joyful learning?
I would completely agree.
I want to add to this too. One of the features, because we mentioned time, and this goes back to the question of joyful learning. And this is something I write about in my book. We often experience time in 2 ways. Qualitative and quantitative, right? And the 2 Greek words of kairos and chronos kind of fit these two understandings, right? Chronos is where we get like measured time, quantitative time coming from the
Chronographs.
chronology.
Yeah.
And it's in its association etymologically goes back to the Titan who ate his children, right? There's a devouring of time. You see this with the riddle in The Hobbit, where Bilbo talks about he has to guess the time that eats all things, right? We also have another understanding of time, which is the experiential time, the qualitative time. So I don't ask you how much Christmas did you have? I ask you, how was your Christmas, right? There's something.
That was the quality of it.
Quality of it. There's something about leisure that understands festivity. Well, what we would call the festal dimensions of the world. There's something about celebration of a particular thing that elevates our experience above the animal that is just trying to survive, right? And that's what I think we can sometimes fall into, is the rigor in the worst sense is just that, by grinding it out, animal existence of survival and competition, and this is going to make you a better person. Well, it may make you a certain kind of person that's busy, but it may not make you human. Right. To be human is in the image of God, which does have some sort of like celebratory element to it.
That's so good. Well, so I think wrapping it up here, that idea of wonder and rigor going together makes joyful learning.
Having festivity
and
in
being
our schools
festivity
matters.
It matters. We want to have celebratory times. Otherwise, we are just grinding, and that's not how God designed us.
And our students should look forward to those times.
Yes,
but they should
I like
also
that.
be able to be balancing, like, now it's time to get down to business and work hard.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody, very much. I think this was a great first 4 questions. We'll have some other questions, I'm sure, that cause a lot more battling, but it was good. Hopefully this is helpful to you all, and Lord bless you as you endeavor in classical Christian education.